every single curse technique in Jujutsu Kaisen. Here's a spoiler warning, I don't want to pull in Usher. I will be covering some fairly recent abilities in the manga, so if you aren't caught up, maybe give this a watch a bit later. One more thing before we get into it, I promise. Last thing. If you subscribe in the next 4 seconds, Nanami will be brought back to life. Rest in peace, my king. The first batch of techniques I'm going to do are learned techniques that anyone can learn. Starting with Black Flash, which is not really a technique, so great start, but it's more of like a special move that requires precise timing when applying cursed energy to a attack, like a punch. This obviously results in a boost of power and can possibly enhance other cursed techniques when used in conjunction with them. Bato's sword technique is a new shadow style technique that allows the user to strike their target with a sword at incredibly fast speeds. Hollow Wicker Basket is a technique that uses a hand sign. The hand sign creates a Hollow Wicker Basket shield, like the name suggests, around them. It's used to neutralize barriers within domains and prevent guaranteed hits, but it does not counter the curse techniques directly. Simple Domain is a technique that creates a small, simple barrier around the user to protect them when they are inside a domain. Falling Blossom Emotion is a secret technique passed down within the big 3 clans. It's used as a counter-attack within a domain, enabling the user to strike back when the domain's user attempts to attack. Now we get into the really interesting ones, which is the unique curse techniques. So this is where I'll be covering is what I meant to say. We'll be covering actual characters and not just techniques. Fumihiko Takuba's comedian gives him the ability to bring amusing things to life. This technique relies on his self-confidence and his mental state, which provides a distinctive advantage for his opponents who can pretty easily nullify his technique through simple bullying, kind of. Hana Kurusu's technique extinguishment is a powerful ability that can cancel out any curse-related techniques, items, barriers, or spirits. The maximum output of this technique is a move called Jacob's Ladder, which was strong enough to pull Sukuna from his host. I won't say who that host was to avoid some spoilers. You're welcome. Haruto Shigemo's Miracles is a defensive technique that accumulates lucky moments. It erases his memory but grants him a significant advantage when he is in life-threatening situations. When his life is in danger, his technique causes a change in reality that saves his life. You can see the markings on his face when they are filled in. That is how many moments he has left. Iori Hazunoki's Explosive Flesh is a pretty simple technique. He can rip off a body part like a tooth, an ear, a lip, anything, and throw it or use it as a projectile that explodes upon impact. Having a solid grasp of reverse curse technique is pretty essential for this because he needs to heal whatever he uses as a projectile. To summarize, it's a very lethal attack if you can heal yourself. Jiro Awasaka's Inverse messes with how attacks work, making powerful hits not that strong and weaker attacks way more powerful than what they should be. It does have its limitations against more complex attacks because some attacks aren't just a strong hit or a weak hit, but it's still pretty useful if he isn't fighting someone that's as smart as Megami who can figure it out pretty easily. Jogo's Disaster Flames, as we saw, is basically any fire attack in any fictional show ever, but he does have the cool ability to crank up the temperature around him, which increases the firepower of his flame attacks. He can trap you in the battlefield with fire, he can summon volcanoes from the ground, and he can launch attacks that hit as hard as a meteor. That's not factually correct. It's just an over-exaggeration. Kokoichi Muta, or Mekamaru, as most people know him. Puppet manipulation allows him to control puppets from a remote location, as the name suggests. These puppets vary from tiny little communication puppets all the way through to basically a Gundam frame, or just a generic mech, which is pretty cool. Mahito's Idol Transfiguration is my favorite technique. Probably. If I could have a curse technique, I'd probably take that one. With just one touch on his target, he can transform their soul and distort the shit out of their bodies. He can also change the shape of his body in what seems like an infinite amount of ways. It is possible to defend his attacks with cursed energy, but it's extremely tricky, especially in close combat situations, which is where this technique is most deadly. Mai and Yorozu's construction is a bit more complicated than you might think. It does look like Mai is just making bullets or weapons, but if we take a look at Yorozu, she can create insect armor using liquid metal. Even though construction has its limits, with a little bit of creativity, you can take that ability to the next level. Basically like the Green Lantern ring, but not at all at the same time. Meimei's Blackbird manipulation is pretty weak when taken at face value, but is a pretty useful technique when used strategically. She can use them as spies and have them follow her opponents or targets. She can turn them into explosive projectiles, and as we saw when she was in that special grades domain, she can use them as sacrificial pawns to save her life. Momo's tool manipulation might seem pretty ordinary, but it's actually quite impressive. It gives her the ability to fly and launch wind attacks from the air when riding her broomstick. This is pretty cool given that flying is pretty rare in the JJK verse, but with all that being said, if we were ranking these techniques, this would be nowhere near the top. Nanami's ratio technique is all about being super precise. He basically breaks down a target into 10 lines and finds a weak spot by dividing it in a 7:3 ratio. This lets him aim for vulnerable areas with extreme accuracy. He doesn't just stop at bodies, he can use his technique on his environment and cause serious damage to his surroundings. Ogami's Seance gives her the ability to talk to the dead without any restrictions. It lets her or her accomplices turn into the dead person that she has collected the DNA of. This offers a powerful disguise or a power enhancement given that the user gains access to the physical abilities of the dead person. Suguru Gato's Cursed Spirit manipulation ensures complete control over cursed spirits that he has gathered. He can also break them down using maximum Uzumaki, which turns them into a powerful energy blast. Plus, he can steal the techniques of the spirit that he's absorbed, like we saw with Mahito. Takako Uro's sky manipulation allows her to shape the sky to form solid or semi-solid objects using it. I don't know why, she also always uses it to cover up her naked body. This technique grants her the ability to levitate and distort space to evade attacks. She can also use a powerful technique called Thin Icebreaker, which causes a shrapnel explosion consisting of solidified pieces of sky. Takamo Ino's Auspicious Beast Summon involves summoning spirit beasts to enhance the user's body. Well, Takamo's body. He is limited to using 4 defined spirits. Kaichi summons a levitating horn that can be telepathically controlled. Reiki is a defensive technique that transmutes the user's cursed energy into telepathically manipulated water. By submerging his feet in this water, he can also use it to severely increase his speed by skidding along the floor. Kirin nullifies his sense of pain, but also heavily drains his stamina and causes him to not be able to sleep after using it. And Ryu, we didn't get to see because he got murdered before he could use it. Tengen is viewed as an immortal entity and a pillar of security within the Jujutsu community. Tengen is the most formidable barrier user amongst all Jujutsu sorcerers. Todo's Boogie Woogie might not have many uses in a fight, but it is extremely useful in a fight. He can switch places with someone or something by just clapping his hands. This confuses the shit out of his opponents if used correctly. And as we saw in his 2 fights with Yuji as his partner, having a close combat heavy hitter is extremely advantageous with Boogie Woogie. Uraume's ice formation is straightforward yet very effective. It allows them to create ice for various applications. They can use a move called Frost Calm, which involves blowing icy air out of their mouth that envelops their target in huge chunks of ice, keeping them frozen in place. Utahime Iori's Solo Forbidden Area temporarily amplifies the output and energy of a sorcerer within her range. It is a technique that she can use on herself, but it's more effective when used on a stronger sorcerer like Gojo. Yuki Tsukumo's Star Rage enables her to add virtual mass to herself and her Shikigami Garuda without actually increasing her weight. And when she applies excess mass to herself, she can turn her body into a black hole. Yuta's mimicry enables him to borrow the cursed technique of another sorcerer or cursed spirit. It does have a time limit, I want to say 5 minutes, and currently there is no evidence to suggest that he loses the technique after borrowing it, so that would make him very formidable, but it is probably likely that he can't keep them after obtaining them, unfortunately. Sukuna's shrine technique consists of 2 slashing attacks. The first, Dismantle, rapidly slices the opponent into tiny little pieces, and then your second technique, Cleave, can be adjusted with the amount of curse energy put into it, and basically it is one huge potent hit for a tougher opponent. Yoshinobu Gakuganji's technique utilizes his body as a sound amplification device, or an amp. Any melody he plays on his guitar is amplified out of his body as waves of cursed energy that deal damage. Dagon's technique grants him control over huge volumes of water that he can trap his opponents in. Nanako Hasaba can use her phone's camera to edit the location of her target. So basically she takes a photo of her target and then she can place them in a different location. Her sister Mimiko Hasaba's technique involves hanging people with a noose, and this is done through kind of like Nobara's straw doll technique. She creates a voodoo doll of her target and then she hangs that doll with a noose. Arata Nita's technique can stop injuries from getting worse. It does not necessarily heal injuries, as he states when healing Yuji and Nobara, and obviously can lessen pain. Hanyu can turn her hair into an aeroplane, allowing her to fly and launch attacks from her head. It's a pretty weird technique and does leave her vulnerable because all of her cursed energy is stored in her head and her hair when using this technique, so the rest of her body is pretty vulnerable to attacks. Haba has the exact same technique, but instead of an airplane, it is a helicopter. Chojuro Zenin's technique grants him the ability to summon giant stone hands from the ground that trap his targets and inevitably crush them. Registar's contractual recreation allows him to manifest objects that are written on contracts or receipts. Such a cool ability. Chizuru Hari can turn the fingers on his left hand, I don't know why not both hands, into claws. We have no idea what they can do besides scratch though. Remi's hair is the shape of a scorpion tail, and she can use it like a scorpion tail to sting people. Ryu Ishigori's curse energy discharge is exactly what it says on the box. He uses his immense chakra. I've made too many Naruto videos. Uses his immense curse energy reserves to discharge huge waves of curse energy. Charles Bernard's G War Staff works by drawing his opponent's blood into a giant spear with a pen tip. With this blood, he can draw his opponent's near future into a manga panel, and obviously the more blood he collects, the more of his opponent's future he can see. Hajime Kashimo's mythical beast armor allows him to transform his body into various electrical creatures. However, as this surpasses human limitations, he can only use this once before his body collapses after its completion. Now, let's move on to the section that has the techniques you've all been waiting for. The clan techniques. The big 3 clans. Starting with a family that is not one of the big 3 clans. The Inumaki's inherited technique, Cursed Speech, is a technique that is activated when speaking specific words and infusing them with cursed energy, either through markings on the user's face or through a tool. For example, Toge Inumaki has markings on his face, while Yuta used a megaphone when he borrowed the technique from Toge. The cool thing about this technique is that when the user speaks, whoever hears the technique has to listen to the command that they were just given. There is a bit of a setback where the user's vocal cords are dealt damage, and the effectiveness of the technique is all dependent on the strength and cursed energy levels of the user. Now we actually get onto the big 3 clans. Starting with the weaker of the clans, I think. I don't think that's a hot take, right? They probably are the weakest clan of the three, the Kamo clan. Their inherited technique is blood manipulation. Blood manipulation is a curse technique that allows the user to control and reshape their blood past its usual form. They can turn external blood into solidified objects. For defense, they can harden it around certain body parts, or they can turn it into sharp spikes. And then internally, they can boost the temperature and the pulse rate of their blood to give them a temporary enhancement physically, kind of like adrenaline. I have no idea how adrenaline works. They can also poison a target using their blood, as we saw when Chozo poisoned Uraume. And yeah, they're the Blood Clan, basically. Now we move on to the Zenin Clan. Or the Zenin Clan. Zenin or Zenin? I'm gonna say Zenin. Zenin. Maki Zenin. Maki Zenin. The fuck do you pronounce that? Zenin it is. Starting with Ogi's Blazing Courage, which appears to be turning fire into a solid blade. The reason I say appears to be is because it's not really been explained. We've just seen it in a few panels. Ranta Zenin's Paralyzing Gaze freezes an opponent in place. Jinshi Zenin's Missile Fist allows him to conjure giant fists that he can propel like missiles using cursed energy. Projection Sorcery is a technique that was passed down from Naruto to his son Naoya. It works by tracking movements at 24 frames per second. The user can map out a sequence of movements within those frames, allowing them to execute these actions in just 1 second and imprisoning those who don't plot their next 24 moves inside a frame for 1 second. It's a little confusing to explain in such little words, but it's cool. And then the strongest technique, the 10 Shadows, involves shadow manipulation and summoning Shikigami bound spirits. The summoned spirits, especially Mahoraga, provide pretty strong offensive capabilities. This is also one of the only techniques we have seen that defeated a Gojo clan member who possessed the Limitless technique and the Six Eyes. And speaking of the Gojo clan, let's move on to the Gojo clan. Their technique is Limitless, and I'm going to break down Limitless into a few of the moves we've seen. Infinity is the base form of the Limitless technique. It's like a superpower that stops things from hitting the user. It does this by crafting an infinite space by dividing numbers upon itself, which means it's not actually stopping the projectile. It's just moving really slowly because of how small the divided numbers are getting. I'm no mathematician, so I explained that really poorly, but you get me right. The next form of Limitless is Blue, which is kind of the opposite of Infinity. It works by boosting cursed energy to turn negative space into reality, which basically just attracts objects to the user. I lied, Blue was not the opposite of Infinity. Red is kind of like the opposite of Blue. It involves a complex manipulation of cursed energy to create an explosive force that propels objects and people away from the user. Hollow Technique, or Purple, is an exclusive Gojo family ability which merges red and blue. It erases everything it hits by creating an imaginary mass through the fusion of convergence and divergence. Now, I have no idea what that means, but I know what it looks like. I don't think I missed anyone, right? Please let me know in the comments if I did miss anyone. And please let me know if you want to see more JJK videos. Thinking of doing a domain expansion video, which is going to suck ass because I struggled explaining a few of Gojo's techniques, which weren't that hard, not compared to domains. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Again, please do subscribe. And as always, I'll see you again next week.